"Don't sign this contract," whispered the cleaner to the millionaire during tense negotiations. But what he heard next left him in shock. Marina began her day as usual, rising before dawn in her small apartment. The old alarm clock had barely rung when she quickly turned it off to avoid waking her younger brother, Yura, who was still sleeping peacefully. His pale face and labored breathing reminded her of the illness that was slowly consuming him. Marina thoughtfully prepared a modest breakfast, reflecting on the money needed for her brother's medication. Her salary as a cleaner barely covered their needs, and the bills seemed to multiply each week. "Today will be better," she told herself, adjusting her gray uniform. Before heading to work, the luxurious corporate skyscraper starkly contrasted with Marina's life. Every morning, she walked through the glass doors with a timid smile and headed straight to the locker room to start her workday. She was invisible to most employees, which deep down suited her just fine. That day, Igor Vasiliev, the corporation's owner, was tense. A millionaire known for his indifference and strict standards. He was preparing for a crucial meeting with foreign investors. His impeccable appearance and haughty demeanor made him an intimidating figure to everyone around him. "Everything must be ready. I will not tolerate any mistakes today," he commanded before entering the conference room. Marina, meanwhile, quietly cleaned the hallways, noticing the employees' nervousness as they prepared for the meeting. When the time came, Igor entered the conference room with his team of lawyers. The investors were already waiting, reviewing documents and exchanging glances. One of the investors, an older man with a strong accent, insisted that Igor sign the contract immediately. "This is an opportunity you cannot miss, Vasiliev," he said. Igor responded coldly, "I do not make hasty decisions. My team will review everything before we proceed." Despite his firm stance, Igor seemed under immense pressure. Marina, finishing her work, froze as she heard the name of one of the investors. Her heart stopped. It was the man connected to the financial ruin that had destroyed her father's life many years ago. Memories of that painful era floated back to her. Her family had lost everything due to fraud, which ultimately took her father's life. Without hesitation, Marina felt an uncontrollable impulse. She quickly entered the conference room, ignoring the surprised looks of those present. "Igor Nikolaevich, stop. Do not sign this contract," she said in a trembling yet determined voice. The room fell silent. Igor slowly rose from his chair, his face expressing a mix of bewilderment and anger. "What are you doing here?" he hissed with contempt. Marina, feeling she had crossed a dangerous line, lowered her gaze but did not back down. "I just wanted to warn you. This man is not trustworthy. My family lost everything because of someone like him," she declared. Igor looked at her with a cold, scrutinizing smirk. "And who are you to tell me what to do?" "A cleaner eavesdropping on conversations," he said, his words cutting like a knife. But Marina did not move. "I have nothing to lose, Igor Nikolaevich. I just did what I thought was right," she replied firmly. Igor sneered sarcastically and turned to his team. "Remove this woman and ensure she never interrupts me again," he ordered. Marina was escorted out of the room, her heart pounding, and tears welling up in her eyes. She had risked her job but knew she could not act otherwise. Even after the conference room doors closed behind her, she could still hear the voices inside her. Igor's face was impassive, but his eyes betrayed his tension. He glanced at the investors, whose attention had been clearly distracted by the interruption. "Please excuse this misunderstanding," he said calmly, not revealing his emotions. "Sometimes, it is difficult to avoid such situations. My employee seems to have been overly concerned. We will address this issue." The investors exchanged glances, and the senior among them, a man with a foreign accent, spoke up. "Vasiliev, we understand that such things can happen, but this situation is quite unusual. Are you sure everything is under control?" Igor nodded, maintaining his composure. "Of course. I value your understanding. We can continue our discussion." However, the atmosphere in the room was tense. After another half-hour of discussion, the investors decided it would be best to postpone the meeting. One of them, seemingly wanting to avoid any suspicions, said, Vasiliv, perhaps it would be better to continue our negotiations at a more appropriate time. Igor nodded, understanding that insisting now would be pointless. Certainly, gentlemen. We will coordinate a new date and continue our dialogue. Thank you for your time. When the investors left the room, Igor stood alone, taking a deep breath to suppress his irritation. His thoughts kept returning to Marina. Her words, her determination, and the way she had burst into the room now gave him no peace. He could not simply ignore what had happened. Marina returned home that evening with a heavy heart. The words of Igor still rang in her ears, causing feelings of shame and despair. Her modest uniform was rumpled and stained from a long day of work, but she paid no attention to it. Her first thought upon entering the apartment was to check on her brother Yura, who was resting in bed. She gently called out to him as she approached to stroke his forehead. The boy struggled to open his eyes and managed a weak smile. "You're home late today," he said. Marina smiled, trying to reassure him. "Just a tough day at work, but everything is fine," she replied, though inside she felt shattered. She stood up to prepare dinner from the meager supplies in the pantry. As she cooked the soup, the tears she had held back all day began to flow. "Why couldn't I keep quiet? What will I do if I get fired?" she thought. Meanwhile, Igor sat at his massive glass desk, the contract he had almost signed lying before him among other documents. He could not shake off Marina's words. "This man is not trustworthy. My family lost everything because of someone like him." The young woman's face, her gaze filled with courage and despair, kept appearing before his eyes. He sighed heavily and pressed the button to summon his assistant. "Clara, bring me all the additional information on these investors. I want a thorough analysis," he ordered. "Certainly, Vasiliv," his assistant replied with professional courtesy. As he waited, he leaned back in his leather chair and gazed at the city lights outside his window. He tried to convince himself that his distrust was merely part of his usual caution, but he knew that for the first time in a long time, something was genuinely bothering him. The next day, Marina went to work feeling as though each step brought her closer to her fate. Her colleagues, though kind, cast curious glances her way. The news of her interruption of the meeting had spread quickly among the employees. "You're really something, Marina," a colleague whispered as they changed in the locker room. "I don't know, I just felt I had to do it," Marina replied, trying not to show her anxiety. "Let's hope Vasiliv doesn't decide to fire you. You know how he is," they said. Marina silently nodded, aware that her colleagues were right. Igor Vasiliv was known for his ruthlessness toward those who questioned his authority. Igor delved deeper into the data on the investors. The more he examined the documents, the clearer it became that Marina might have saved him from a disaster. The financial reports revealed ambiguities, transactions with dubious intermediaries, hidden lawsuits that had not surfaced earlier, and numerous contracts that had led other companies to bankruptcy. As he pieced together the facts, he realized that his company could have faced enormous losses if not for Marina's warning. He pressed the intercom button. Clara summoned the analyst responsible for vetting these investors. Immediately, he said, his voice cold and sharp. "Certainly, Vasiliv," she replied. A middle-aged man with a worried expression entered the room. It was Viktor Sergeyevich, the senior analyst in charge of vetting deals. "You called for me, Igor Nikolaevich?" he asked, trying to appear confident. Igor looked up from the documents, his face expressing restrained irritation. "Sit down, Viktor Sergeyevich," he said, gesturing to the chair in front of his desk. The man sat down, visibly nervous. "Explain to me how you could have missed this," Igor began, tossing printouts detailing the dubious transactions and lawsuits onto the desk. Viktor Sergeyevich frowned, quickly scanning the documents. "Igor Nikolaevich, we checked the investors according to standard protocols. At first glance, everything seemed clean. He tried to justify himself. At first glance, Igor interrupted, rising sharply from his chair. This is not just negligence. You put our company and the thousands of employees who depend on us at risk. Do you understand the consequences this could have had? Viktor Sergeyevich swallowed nervously. We can conduct another review. I am confident we can rectify the situation, he began. Igor looked at him with disdain. It is too late for that. I do not need excuses and promises. I need results. And if you cannot handle such an important task, you have no place in my company. But Igor, Viktor tried to interject. Enough, Igor said firmly, returning to his chair. You are fired. I cannot afford to work with people who cannot ensure the safety of our deals. Viktor Sergeyevich paled but did not argue. He understood that the situation was beyond repair. Very well, he said briefly, standing up. Thank you for the opportunity to work here, he said, leaving the office. Igor remained alone, sitting in silence for a few moments to calm his irritation. This situation had shown him the importance of not relying solely on formalities and protocols. After the conversation with the analyst, he summoned the company's chief lawyer. Alexander, I want to suspend all negotiations with these investors until we have complete information, he instructed. May I ask what prompted this change of mind, Igor Nikolaevich? The lawyer asked. Igor paused, recalling Marina's face. Let's call it intuition, he replied briefly. That evening, Marina returned home with a heavy heart. She was still worried about the potential consequences of her actions. Yura, seeing her, smiled from his bed. Sister, you look tired today, he noted. Just a lot of work, she replied, sitting down beside him. Were you thinking about your boss again? Yura suddenly asked. Marina looked at him in surprise. What makes you say that? She asked, trying to hide her embarrassment. Because you always have that look when you're thinking about him, he said with a mischievous smile. Marina laughed, feeling her cheeks flush. Don't be silly, little one. I was just thinking about how to solve all our problems, she replied, hugging him. But Yura, burying his face in the pillow, continued to smile. The next day, Igor made a decision. Clara, invite Marina to my office, he said to his assistant. Marina, receiving the summons, felt her heart skip a beat. She did not know what to expect. A momentary anxiety washed over her, but she composed herself and made her way to him. When she entered, Igor Nikolaevich set aside his documents and looked at her with a serious expression. Marina, please have a seat, he began. Marina, feeling intense tension, cautiously sat down across from Igor. Her hands trembled slightly, but she tried to maintain her composure. Igor, folding his hands on the desk, looked at her intently before speaking. I have thought a lot about our conversation, Marina, he said, his voice softer than usual. And I have reviewed the documents related to these investors. You were right. These people were indeed trying to deceive me. Marina looked up, surprised by his words. I did not expect you to believe me, she confessed. Igor continued, his gaze softening slightly. I rarely listened to anyone, especially people who, as I thought, were far removed from my world. But your story, it made me think. You have been through a lot, and your courage deserves respect. Marina felt tears welling up in her eyes. She had not expected to hear such words from a man she had considered cold and arrogant. Thank you, Igor Nikolaevich. This means more to me than you know, she whispered. Igor paused as if considering his next words. But I wanted to discuss more than just that. You mentioned that you care for your brother and sacrifice everything for him. That requires incredible strength. Marina lowered her gaze, her heart pounding. She had not expected him to know such details. I cannot abandon him. He needs my help, she said, trying to hide her embarrassment. Yura, my family. He is brave and always encourages me. Igor nodded, listening attentively. I want to help you, he said with unexpected resolve. Cover the medical expenses for your brother. You should not bear this burden alone. Marina's eyes widened in disbelief. But, Igor Sergeyevich, I cannot accept this, she began, feeling a mix of emotions. It is too much. I do not want to be a burden to you. You already pay me a salary. Igor leaned forward, his gaze serious but warm. This is not charity, Marina. It is a way of saying thank you. If not for you, my company could have suffered enormous losses. You deserve compensation more than anyone. Marina was silent for a long time, then finally sighed. All right. For my brother's sake. I will accept your help, she said softly, her voice trembling. Igor nodded, a slight smile appearing on his face. I will arrange everything. Do not worry. The following days passed in a blur. Igor ensured that Yura received the best possible treatment. He hired the best doctors and procured the necessary medications. Each time Marina saw her brother beginning to recover, her heart filled with gratitude. But along with it came questions. Why was Igor doing this? What did he see in her? One evening, Igor decided to visit Marina at home. He felt it was necessary to understand her life better to know how he could help more. When Marina opened the door and saw him, she was astonished. Igor Sergeyevich, what are you doing here? She asked in bewilderment, looking at him. I wanted to see how your brother is doing. May I come in? He asked calmly. Marina hesitated briefly, but then opened the door wider. The apartment was small with minimal furniture. Everything was clean and tidy. Igor surveyed the room, noting the worn chairs and faded wallpaper. Yura was lying in bed but struggled to prop himself up on his elbows when he saw Igor. Are you the one helping my sister? He asked with childlike directness. Igor approached him, smiled, and sat on the edge of the bed. Yes, that's me. And not just your sister, but you as well. How are you feeling? He asked, looking at the boy. Better. Thank you so much, Yura replied, his voice weak but sincere. Igor turned to Marina, who stood to the side, watching their interaction with trepidation. Your sister is a true hero. I am just trying to say thank you in this way, he said, smiling at the boy. After Igor left, Marina sat by Yura's side, stroking his hair. That man. He is strange, isn't he? Yura suddenly remarked, looking up at his sister with a smile. Marina chuckled softly. A little, she replied, but her thoughts were in turmoil. Igor Nikolaevich had changed since she first met him. He no longer seemed merely cold and arrogant to her. His actions made her wonder about his true nature. Meanwhile, Igor, on his way home, felt a warm sensation in his chest. He rarely allowed himself to be vulnerable or emotional, but Marina and her brother had touched something within him. This visit had left a profound impression on him. In the days that followed, Igor found more reasons to cross paths with Marina. He would linger in the hallways when she was cleaning or visit common areas where she worked. Though he maintained his professional demeanor, there was a softness in his gaze that Marina noticed but did not understand. He could no longer ignore that Marina had changed his perspective on many things. She had shown him how to see more in people than he was accustomed to noticing. One evening, he sat in his office, gazing at the city lights. Her image would not leave his mind. He felt that her strength and sincerity had shattered the wall he had built around himself for many years. The next day, he made a decision. Clara, organize a dinner at my place. Invite Marina and her brother, he instructed his assistant. Certainly, Vasiliv, she replied without questioning but surprised by his request. When Marina received the invitation, she was taken aback. She was unaccustomed to such gestures and did not know how to react. But her friend Sonia persuaded her to go. This is your chance, Marina. You deserve to relax and feel important. Besides, with someone like Igor Nikolaevich, all your colleagues will envy you, Sonia insisted. Marina hesitated but eventually agreed. The evening of the dinner arrived. Marina came in a simple yet elegant dress that Sonia had helped her choose. Yura was excited and smiled throughout the evening. When they entered Igor's apartment, he greeted them warmly. "Welcome," he said with a genuine smile. The evening passed in a warm atmosphere. Yura happily shared stories and Igor listened with genuine interest, occasionally casting attentive glances at Marina. She felt her tension gradually easing. When the dinner came to an end, Igor escorted them to the door. Before they left, he took Marina's hand. "You have changed my life, Marina," he said softly. "I want you to know that it means a lot to me." Marina, at a loss for words, simply nodded, feeling a new emotion stirring within her. But Yura, nestling into his pillow, continued to smile. A few days passed after the dinner at Igor's place. Marina could not stop thinking about that evening. His words, his gaze, everything had left a deep impression on her. She had never experienced such attention, especially from someone who lived in a completely different world. But her fears and doubts did not leave her. One day, during the lunch break, Sonia approached her with a playful smile. "Vasiliv often asks about you," she said. "Stop it, Sonia. He is probably just interested in how Yura is doing," Marina replied, trying to hide her embarrassment. "Sure, keep telling yourself that. The dinner was for Yura too, right?" Sonia laughed. Marina just shook her head, but her thoughts returned to Igor. Her heart began to believe that his interest could be something more, but her mind told her it was impossible. Igor, meanwhile, was also in turmoil. He felt that Marina had become someone special to him, but he did not know how to express it to her. Her modesty, her strength, and her selfless love for her brother made him admire her more and more. He realized that their lives were very different, but for the first time in a long time, he did not want to push his feelings away. The next day, Igor invited Marina to his office. When she entered, he stood up from his desk and gestured for her to sit across from him. "Marina," he began, his voice soft but resolute. "I want to talk to you openly." She tensed, not knowing what to expect. "I understand that our lives are completely different," he continued. "But since you entered my life, much has changed. You have shown me what it means to be strong, honest, and caring. And I want you to know that you are more than just an employee to me." Marina looked at him in bewilderment. His words took her by surprise. "Igor Nikolaevich," she began, but he interrupted her. "Please call me Igor," he said with a slight smile. Marina lowered her gaze, feeling her cheeks flush. "I do not know what to say," she whispered. "You do not need to say anything," he replied. "Just allow me to be by your side. Allow me to help you and Yura. Not just out of obligation, but because it is important to me." Marina felt her heart filling with warmth. She had not expected to hear such words from a man she had considered unattainable. That night, Marina lay awake for a long time. She looked at the sleeping Yura, thinking about how her life had changed so much in the past few weeks. For the first time in a long time, she had hope. But along with it came doubts. Could she allow herself to believe in Igor's feelings? The next day, Igor did not wait. He invited Marina and Yura to his place for dinner again. This time, he wanted them to feel like a part of his life. When Marina and her brother arrived, Igor greeted them at the door. His smile was warm, and his eyes held a genuine spark. "Welcome," he said. Yura immediately ran up to Igor, showing him his new drawing. "Look what I drew," he said excitedly. Igor laughed and took the drawing. "Your brother is quite the artist," he remarked. Turning to Marina, the dinner passed in a relaxed and warm atmosphere. After the meal, when Yura dozed off on the couch, Igor invited Marina out onto the terrace under the starlit sky. He looked at her and softly said, "Marina, I have a question for you. Are you ready to let someone who cares about you into your life?" Marina looked at him, not knowing what to say. Her heart was pounding, and her mind was racing with thoughts. But she saw sincerity in his eyes and understood that, for the first time in her life, she could allow herself to trust. She began, her voice trembling. "I do not know what to say. This is all so unexpected." Igor smiled, his eyes filled with warmth. I just wanted you to know. You are more to me than just someone I want to help. You mean a lot to me. Marina felt tears welling up in her eyes. She tried to smile but was overcome with emotion. Thank you, she whispered. You cannot imagine how much your words mean to me. Igor slowly moved closer but did not rush her. He simply stood by her side, giving her time to collect her thoughts. After a few moments of silence, Marina looked into his eyes. I am afraid, she said. Afraid that our worlds are too different. That this could end before it even begins. Igor smiled gently, his voice steady and reassuring. The difference in our worlds does not matter if we both want to be together. This is just the beginning, Marina. And I am willing to walk this path with you, whatever it may be. Marina nodded, her heart beating faster. For the first time in many years, she allowed herself to hope. In the following days, life began to change for both of them. Igor became more involved in Marina and Yura's lives, showing that his words were more than just promises. A few weeks passed since that evening when Igor and Marina decided to move forward together. Their lives gradually began to take on new meaning. Yura was recovering, his energy and joy returning, and the relationship between Marina and Igor grew closer. The wedding was modest but incredibly touching. In the following days, life began to change for both of them. Igor became more involved in Marina and Yura's lives, showing that his words were more than just promises. A few weeks passed since that evening when Igor and Marina decided to move forward together. Their lives gradually began to take on new meaning. Yura was recovering, his energy and joy returning, and the relationship between Marina and Igor grew closer. The wedding was modest but incredibly touching. After the wedding, Igor, Marina, and Yura began a new life in a cozy house outside the city. The house was surrounded by a green garden that Yura had always dreamed of. Every day was filled with joy, laughter, and care for one another. Yura, fully recovered, ran around the garden with a kite, while Igor and Marina watched him from the terrace. You know, Igor said, taking her hand, I never thought I could be this happy. Marina looked at him with warmth. And I never thought I deserved such a life, she replied. Igor smiled and squeezed her hand tighter. You deserve all this and more. You have changed my life. And now I want to make your life the way you dream it to be. They sat on the terrace, enjoying the warm evening and the view of the stars. At that moment, they both knew that despite all the trials they had faced, happiness awaited them. Thank you for listening to the story to the end. Do not forget to leave your opinion about this story. Subscribe to the Tell Me channel and share this video with your friends and loved ones. This motivates us to continue working on new stories every day. You can open new content and watch it in the description under this video. See you soon.